When choosing a high-end headphone, it's pretty rare that something gets all of the practical aspects right. A headphone might sound great, but build quality could be subpar. It might be built like a tank, but ergonomics are not exactly ideal. Maybe it looks and feels amazing, but just doesn't sound great. And then every now and then, something comes along that seems to tick all of the boxes. This is the Austrian Audio Composer. I'm Golden Sound, you're watching The Headphone Show by headphones.com. This is a headphone that I've been wanting to talk about for a little while now, and I figured since now we have the ability to measure and show how headphones are behaving on our own heads, not just on measurement rigs, click here to watch our video of our trip to the Turret Lab in the UK for that. It was a good reason and a good time to talk about a headphone that I found myself enjoying and using a lot in the last few months, and not just because of how it sounds. The Composer does not come with a carrying case or really much in the way of accessories, which is a little bit of a bummer, but at the same time, I can kind of forgive it for something which I'm mostly going to be using exclusively at my desk. The design offers just enough visual flair to be interesting, modern, and eye-catching, but not going so far as to be distracting, including forgoing the halo or antennas that many other headphones in this price bracket often have, making this quite ideal for people that need to use them for video calls and meetings, as well as just listening to music. Backed up by a robust construction and absolutely solid feeling materials, this is one of, if not possibly my favorite physical designs of a headphone. It's remarkably comfortable, offering both tilt and swivel, both of which have low friction without at all feeling loose, which is nice. It's got a suspension strap that even on my massive noggin didn't leave hot spots at all, and I can wear these for hours on end without getting uncomfortable. And it just feels solid while still being sleek. No big hunks of metal used for the sake of build quality and being able to drive a car over it, but making it heavy and uncomfortable to wear. No weird things sticking out of the headband to make a more comfortable headband design that makes you look like an alien when you wear it on a Zoom call. It achieves all of the things that you'd want from a practical aspect in the design of a headphone and looks damn good whilst doing so. It looks and feels appropriate for a high-end headphone, but remains modest. The one bit of the physical design of this headphone that I'm less keen on is the cable. It's using this proprietary dual banana plug connector, which they have released design files for, so theoretically other companies could make the same connector, they could make custom cables and connectors for it, but this is the only headphone using it, so probably no one's going to. I would definitely have preferred if this had just 3.5mm connections, same as most other headphones on the market, or at least if it came with some little adapters or something. Also, this cable is very long, and that makes it quite liable to getting caught under the wheels of my desk chair, which is a bit of a frustration and adds to the frustration of not being able to easily replace this cable with a different and preferably shorter one. It's an okay cable, it's a little stiff, it's got some shape memory to it, the softer rubber bits do help tame any microphonics. It's not my favourite cable in the world, I really do wish that this was easier to replace, but it's also not the worst, far from it. The pads on the Composer are also easily swappable using a magnetic system that again is designed excellently, but I'll talk about those a little bit more in the sound section because there are some important differences between the stock leather pads and the optional suede pads, and I strongly recommend that you use the suede pads. For me anyway, these ones work quite a bit better, but we'll talk about that in the sound section. Lastly, these are exceptionally easy to drive. You do not need anything particularly powerful to drive these. There are 22 ohm and 128 dB per volt sensitivity, so an Apple dongle will get these blasting to ridiculous levels. To get these to 110 dB, you need something just under a milliwatt of power. So actually, you probably want to be looking for a clean, low noise source rather than something with more power, because then you might hear a little bit of hiss on these. They really are quite sensitive. One of the main reasons that these have been pretty permanently at my desk for the last couple of months is that they just work so well as a proper, practical headphone. Yes, they do sound great, and I've got some other headphones that do sound great too, but none that really give a full package like this does. I don't get any weird questions when I'm in a call with someone going, what the hell is on your head? I can wear them for hours and hours at a time. I can also just run them off my audio interface, so I don't need to make sure that everything's going through a powerful amp. They just work. So what about the sounds? Well, let's start by looking at some of the measurements of the Austrian Audio Composer, starting with the B&K 5128 measurement rig results, then afterwards we'll have a look at how they behave on my head. Despite being a dynamic driver, this has quite a linear bass response. Usually dynamic driver headphones you'd expect to see more sub-bass roll off and sometimes more of a mid-bass focus as well. These though have a very planar magnetic-like bass extension. It's basically dead flat, which I like both because then I get more bass on these than something like a HEDD D1, but also it means that these are easier to tune to your liking. With a lot of dynamic driver headphones, if you don't want to end up with a weird hump, you kind of have to have a filter that tries to compensate for the roll-off of the dynamic driver, whereas these, you could just add a bass shelf and you're good to go. The mid-range is pretty even and nicely down-tilted overall, falling into a fairly sizable dip around 2 kHz, but this is just going to depend on how much of a soundstage dip you tend to like. Resolve might have more to complain about here because he definitely likes that region filled in a bit more. I, on the other hand, actually often quite like a bit of a dip here. It's called the soundstage dip by many because it does seem to have a bit of an effect of making things sound more spacious, and these do stage really nicely. They're a very big sounding headphone, particularly for a dynamic driver. I don't often get the same sense of soundstage on a lot of dynamic driver headphones, with some exceptions like an HEDD 100 or something, compared to most planars. These do it really well. They're a very big sounding headphone. The trade-off to this though, and having that dip around 2 kHz, is usually that it negatively impacts timbre. It can make things sound a little bit thinner or leave certain vocals sounding a little bit nasally. What's a bit unique on the Composer though is the narrowness of this 2 kHz dip. Usually on many other headphones like a Modhouse Tungsten for example, the entire 1 to 3-ish kHz range is pulled down quite a bit. Whereas on the Composer, because the 1 to 1.5 kHz and 2.5 to 3 kHz ranges are basically where they should be, just with that narrow 2 kHz range pulled down, it doesn't seem to have quite the same negative impact to timbre of vocals in particular that I often get on many other stagey headphones. They still sound pretty full. Sure, it is timbrally better if it's completely filled in, but then I lose my soundstage, and I do like my soundstage. This seems to strike a better balance and compromise less on the timbre, while still giving me that spaciousness effect that I personally really enjoy and allows me to feel more immersed in the music that I'm listening to. From there on up, it does start to rise a fair bit, and this is a bright leaning headphone. For many people out of the box, especially with the leather pads, this is going to be a bit too spicy. But the nice thing is that the profile of it, where it's just got more treble overall rather than being bright because it's got a couple narrow and oppressive peaks, means you can just shelve the treble down a bit. For me, I run these on the Zale HM1 and I just crank the bass up a notch or two, crank the treble down one notch on the shelves, and that's basically it. That is with the stock leather pads, and I much prefer the suede pads on the Composer. So let's take a look at what the Composer is doing with each of those on my own head. I did several measurements with both sets of pads with every setting of the angular rotation that you can do on the Composer, and these were the results. My own HRTF, the way that my own head and ears usually affect sound, is completely compensated away here, so what you see is exactly what I'm hearing. I can do a tone sweep and every single peak and dip that you see on this graph lines up exactly with what I am actually hearing. I'm so excited that we can do this, that I can show you exactly how a headphone is behaving on my head, and if you like the content that we're putting out and you want to help support us do more cool stuff like this, then consider joining the channel membership. 100% of the income from YouTube channel memberships goes to us on the content team and the content budget, which allows us to do stuff like the trip to London to get our own HRTFs characterized and test headphones in the way that we're about to do here. But also, do go and watch that video. It's one of the most exciting things that I think we've put out in a while. Now, the first thing to note in the results is that the leather pads seem to have a little bit more sub-bass roll-off, which they do, sort of. If I swap to just showing the results for the left and right channels of the leather pads on the Composer, you can see that one of them is rolling off a bit more than the other one. And this persisted even when I swapped the pads left to right, so it's not that one of the pads is faulty or anything, it's just that the leather pads unfortunately don't seem to seal particularly well against the right side of my face, whereas the suede pads were fine. On the suede pads, I get the same linear bass response that we saw on the B&K 5128 measurements, and is also very similar all the way up through the mid-range towards and into that narrow 2 kHz dip, giving a pretty linear and accurate sounding mid-range overall. Maybe a little bit of extra body and warmth at times due to that slight lift at the 300 to 500 Hz region, which I actually quite like. I think the fact that this has got quite a bit more upper treble, it helps to balance it out by having just a hint of extra lower mids. Gives the vocals a bit more body. Tracks like Breathe by Skinny Living are particularly good on the Composer because they're so clear and precise, but it still backs it up with just enough body and warmth to keep the vocals sounding correct. It's not a thin sounding headphone. It is a bright sounding headphone, but it's not a thin sounding headphone. Timbre of most vocals and things like brass instruments actually gets pretty close to what I consider ideal on the Composer. Yeah, they do need a little bit more filling in at times, but it's just a trade-off between soundstage and timbral accuracy. I don't like headphones that fully fill in that gap, like an HEDD 600. Sure, the vocal timbre is great, but the complete closed-in sensation takes me out of things. Conversely, headphones like the Hifiman Sesvara Original had quite a prominent scoop around 2 kHz and spread out on a wider area, which meant that some vocals did just come across sounding too thin, same as stuff like the Rala Manis, that does it quite to a significant degree. Whereas this, it still fills in most of that range, and so vocal timbre does get closer to what I'd want, but it still gives me the Soundstage, it still gives me the spaciousness effect, and I think it strikes a better compromise. And then right after that dip, it rises back up pretty swiftly to a fairly reasonable, although on the leather pads, slightly elevated 3 kHz. And that actually is the other reason why I straight up prefer the suede pads to the leather pads. The leather pads, they have a little bit less sub bass, at least on my head. They also have a little bit less on the 400 to 1.5 kHz region, which makes them sound a little bit thinner. And then they elevate the 3-ish kHz region a bit more, which makes things sound a bit more in your face and a bit shouty. And the combination of all three of those means that it's just an overall thinner, less fleshed out, and slightly more aggressive sound that I didn't particularly enjoy as much. It's not a massive change, the two pads are still very similar, it is still the same headphone, but the suede pads do really just help to balance things out, just a little bit more sub bass, a little bit more lower upper mids, and then slightly more reasonable 3K. Those three things just help to make a much more correct sound overall. So if you are considering getting the Composer, I would strongly recommend opting to get the suede pads as well. For me, they are a straight up improvement. Now, the treble on this craft might look a little spooky at first. This is quite a bit peakier than the B&K 5128 measurement we looked at earlier, but don't be too alarmed. This is not because this unit is just being super peaky and is behaving way worse than the other one, it's just because of how a lot of headphones tend to react on my particular head. If I compare the result with the suede pads against the HEDD D1 or a Hifiman Arya Unveiled, you can see that there's some treble peaks and dips in basically the same places, and that's not because my HRTF compensation was wrong or all three headphones are actually just super peaky and happen to be so in the same way. That's just how a lot of headphones behave and interact with my head and ears in close proximity. I hear all these peaks and dips. If I sweep a tone generator, I hear those two narrow ear canal dips where it's just nulling out, my ear canal is nulling out those frequencies. I hear those peaks. But it's a function of how a lot of headphones just seem to interact with my ears in close proximity, hence why I get the similar results on several different headphones, and why it looks different to the B&K 5128 result. In fact, if you've seen our Why Auto EQ Sucks and Doesn't Work video, which if you haven't seen it, go and watch that, it explains why headphones are just going to behave differently on different people's heads. The result with these headphones is going to be different on my head versus a 5128, and that's going to be different to the result that you would get on your head as well. And that's also why you can't use something like Auto EQ to just magically correct it to flat, because the treble in particular is not going to be doing the same thing on your head as it is on a measurement rig or on my head. So I'm not comparing my result against the 5128 result, I'm going to compare some results of this headphone on my head to other headphones on my head, because that's the best way to show a one-to-one difference. I think comparing against the HEDD D1 is probably the best place to start to show why I love the Composer so much. The first thing being, I get a notably more linear bass response. As well as just being more bass on the Composer than I get on the D1, the profile also means that it's much easier to tune to my taste. I can just add a bass shelf and away I go, whereas on the D1, if I just add a shelf, it doesn't quite work so much, and I still need to add more sub bass with a separate filter as well, or try and get a peak filter that matches. It's just more of a faff. But also, more bass. I like that. The upper treble on the Composer does behave pretty similarly to how the D1 behaves on my head. It's just got a bit more of it overall, so if possible, I would shelve down the treble a bit just to tame the brightness slightly, but I don't feel any need to. I don't mind brighter tunings, especially when they've got a decent amount of low end to back it up, and this does, so I can quite happily listen to this just stock tuning out of the box, but if I have the option to EQ, I'm going to EQ with basically any headphone. This is no exception. The big thing that I really do prefer about the Composer compared to the D1 is the lower treble, the ear gain region. For me, the 2 to 3 kHz region in particular is just too high on the D1. There is just too high of an ear gain peak, and it makes it sound pretty shouty. I have to EQ down that region on the D1, or else it is a little unpleasant to listen to, whereas this, I don't. Some of the preference testing we've been doing behind the scenes shows that there is indeed a bit of an overall preference for a slightly reduced 3-ish kHz region, and in fact, just going back to some of the other headphones that I've had as favorites in the past, things like the Hifiman Arya Unveiled, the Hifiman Sesvara Unveiled, or the Modhouse Tungsten, all of them have a little bit of a reduction in this area, and so I do prefer a little bit less 3 kHz, and the D1 just has too much of it for me. Actually, the Arya Unveiled is a headphone that I've spoken very highly of in the past, and if we show the results from that and the Composer on my head together, the bass and mid-range in particular is almost identical, just a bit more bumpy and modal on the Arya Unveiled. The Arya Unveiled does sound a little bit more fleshed out than the Composer, a little bit more full because it's got more of a filled-in 1 to 2 kHz region in particular. But for a lot of tracks, in fact I'd say most stuff, I do prefer the slight hit there for the benefit in Soundstage that I get on the Composer. This gives me a better sense of spaciousness, and I overall found the sound more enjoyable than the Arya Unveiled because of it. The 4 to 5 kilohertz lift on the Arya Unveiled is the main thing that I complained about in the review, and it might not look like all that much here, but it does just bug me quite a bit. It's a very sudden rise and stark contrast to the stuff below it, and it just bugs me a little bit too much. There's then more energy compared to the Composer, around 6 to 7 kilohertz, to a little bit less around 10 kilohertz, then quite a bit more above 15 kilohertz, so on my head, whilst both of them work reasonably well, this one just ends up sounding a little bit more balanced and also easier to adjust. If I'm trying to correct things on the Arya Unveiled, I got to do a bit of a 4.5 kilohertz filter. I've got to start to fuss with the treble a bit, whereas on the Composer, I can just shelve things down a bit and away I go. I'm so torn about the brightness aspect of this headphone because on one hand, especially with the stock leather pads, it could be a little bit too much at times, but I think that's in large part due to the slight pulling down of the mids and slight pulling down of the sub bass, leaving the treble to be more of what you're hearing and a little bit more objectionable. With the suede pads, that's not the case. With the suede pads, yeah, it's a brighter leaning headphone, but it's not too much. I don't mind brighter tunings a lot of the time. In fact, I often prefer them if the rest of the tuning is done well, and this has done it well. This has got a really linear bass extension, it's got pretty linear mids, and the 2 kilohertz dip, whilst yeah, it's a coloration, I want it there because I like me some Soundstage, and I think it's doing it better than a lot of other headphones that have a much wider 2 kilohertz scoop. And so I don't mind the extra treble because it makes it sound incredibly detailed, technical, incisive. It's just crystal clear whilst still being really nicely balanced overall. And the other thing that that elevated treble helps to do is make the bass extremely punchy. This is a very engaging and dynamic sounding headphone because bass isn't just bass, there is a leading edge, a transient treble element to the strike on a drum, for example. And so having that amped up a bit makes things sound a little bit harder hitting. This is extremely punchy and really good fun for things like electronic music. I think it'd be pretty unfair for anyone to accuse this headphone of being boring. It is not. This is very fun, engaging, and lively sounding. Whether it's a little bit too lively at times is just going to depend on your preferences, and for some people it will be. This is a slightly brighter leaning headphone, but I think that that's part of its charm for me, and the fact that it's doing that brightness much better than a lot of other headphones that are either bright for the sake of being bright, or bright with nothing else to back it up. This has got the right stuff to back it up, and I like the extra technicalities that the extra treble provides. But again, thanks to the relatively even treble profile, it's pretty easy to just EQ that, literally just add a treble shelf and you're good to go. The only other bit that you might want to look at a more targeted correction for is around 5 kilohertz. On the 5128, that bit was a little bit elevated. On my head, I tend to get a bit of a 5 kilohertz peak with every headphone, so it matters a little bit less for me. I just use a shelf most of the time unless I'm doing a full correction to my HRTF, which we'll talk more about that in an upcoming video. I did also, as mentioned, check the rotation angle of these and how that affects the sound on my head, and the answer there is generally not much. The only thing that really changed was as I went more angled, I seemed to get a little bit better of a seal, and so bass would rise by up to a decibel or so. So it's worth playing about with seeing what angle is going to get the best seal on your head. Beyond that, I didn't really see much in the way of changes. This is a headphone that I'd summarize as being correct enough with some artistic flair and direction that I really like the sound of. It is detailed, snappy, incisive, but still gets the mid-range and body of things pretty correct. It's a headphone that I found myself listening to for I don't even know how many hours at this point. And with any headphone, if I have the option to EQ, there's always going to be things that I'm going to try and tweak and adjust because no headphone is going to be perfect on your head the moment you put it on. But with this one, I don't really feel the need to all that much. And when I do, the profile of it makes it so easy. I mostly just add shelves. I'm not trying to target narrow peaks and things in the same way that I do on many other headphones. The actual stock profile of it, other than bass to treble balance slightly, just fits really well. I like what it's doing with Soundstage. I like what it's doing with timbral balance. I like what it's doing with that level of detail and how punchy it makes things in the low end sound because of the treble that it's got. It puts a smile on my face, and whilst doing so doesn't leave me hesitating to reach for it because I'm going to have to take it off so I don't look ridiculous in a call, or oh, I'm going to wear it for a few hours and get uncomfortable, or oh, I need to make sure all my audio is going through a powerful amp. It's just sensible. Pleasantly sensible. That might be the most British conclusion I've ever come to in a review, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any other questions you wanted to ask about the Austrian Audio Composer, anything else mentioned in this video, DACs, amps, music, gear, or anything else at all, then come and say hey on the Headphones.com Discord server or the Headphones.com forum where I and other wiggly air enthusiasts will endeavor to help. Till next time, I'm Golden Sound, you're watching The Headphone Show by Headphones.com. See you next time.